We are live. Hey, it's Sam. Hope everyone can hear me okay. I am excited to be bringing a really cool app that I was able to work on with a challenger of StepSend and the ability to see what we can create using a possibility of directives, along with being able to support REST APIs and building it all really, really interesting routers in NextJS and seeing how a Next app can provide a lot of functionality that you would see in a modern React application, and the ability to tie data together and be able to create a interactive app that shows a lot of different capabilities and a lot of different app distribution between different events and people going to specific events, and seeing how we can make the experience for an individual that has to go to an event that wants to sign up and use a form, have a much easier experience when they want to check into these specific events and be able to fill out information that we can then receive in Firebase. So I'm going to pop on over to the stream right here. And this is just the homepage of the app that we're going to be building out. If I refresh it right now, I think I don't have it running. So that's just kind of what we're going to be getting at right away. And you saw that it had check-in screen. And then it's just going to be using StepSend and also supporting REST APIs through Firestore, Firebase as well. So if you were to go and create a Firebase app, what we'll be doing today, it's going to look like something like this, and you're going to get a lot of Firebase configurations, and then you're going to tie it to a Firebase store. And then we're going to be able to ping our Firebase store and be able to kind of pull data there directly as a database as it would be. They like to use Firebase a lot for mobile applications and the ability to have a very, very easy to use SDK, which we'll be tying in with our REST API functionality and showing how we can create a REST API right alongside of a GraphQL API in a Next.js application, and then showing how we can tie that data together, all coming from an individual Firestore in Firebase to create a application that can use both different facets in different ways to support a modern application using modern technologies like Next.js. So I just kept a screenshot here when I was building it out, and when I was building out my Firestore, and just took a screenshot here just to show you kind of what you're going to be looking at and the keys that you're going to have to provide in your Next.js application to be able to connect to your Firebase store. You're also going to have to create functionality there that will kind of enable it to be able to get access to the Firebase, which is held within your Firebase store. And it's all within their documentation to be able to do that. So getting into it, kind of what we're going to be having here, I took it from another sample that we kind of had. So you see restaurants in here. We're not going to be focusing around that. We're going to be focusing on event in person. So as you can see, we have 3 different events. And what I like to call all these events in our application for this one is hackathons. So we have 3 different types of hackathons with form fields, ID, location, and name. Very simple. We have an identifier where the actual hackathon occurred, and then the name of the hackathon. And then moving over, we have form fields for an individual event called the Silicon Valley Hackathon based out of San Jose. And then the last one being Miami Vice Hackathon. So you're saying, why are there fields associated with each event? So the way we kind of look at this and the way we're building this app today on Next.js is we're thinking as if some person is coming to an event and they enter this event and they come to the check-in site or the check-in location, and people go, oh, okay, great. Thank you for coming here. We're excited that you're here for our event. Have you signed up online? They go, no, I haven't signed up online. I'm just here right now. I want to be a part of it. Okay, here's an iPad. Can you fill out this information on this iPad that we would like to have for you to be able to attend our event? And that's exactly what it is. So Miami Vice Hackathon, as you see here, they have an associated form fields for that event that we want to be able to understand someone. And Miami Vice Hackathon doesn't want a lot. They don't need a lot. They just want your name, and then you can attend their event. This is all dummy data, as I said, but then you come over to the San Jose Hackathon and you fill out these 4 pages as well, or fill out these 4 fields. They want a little bit more. They want your phone, email, and your address as well, which is, I don't know if they really need that, but for this example, yes, they do. And last being the Chicago one, which is the one that we're going to be behaving as if people in this demo here are going to be going to it today. And as you can see, they kind of have everything similar here, except first time at event. And so what we want to be able to do is if someone has attended all these different hackathons previous, and they're all kind of stored in the same company working on and hosting all these hackathons, if you've attended other hackathons previous to this company that is hosting all of them, they may not want to ask you the same questions. They may already know your name and your email. So they don't really want to have to ask that again on a forum when you come to the event, say, hey, I'm here. So what we're going to be able to do today is kind of do a real quick way of having you just provide your email right away when you come to check in. And then we're going to go check here at the Firebase and say, has this person been to our events before? Oh, yes, they have. And that person here is going to be our John Doe. And John Doe has attended 2 previous events. And I believe if I were to say these is San Jose and the Miami one. So he's attended every single one up until now. And now he's going to be going to their 3rd one. And he really likes to travel. He's been to Miami, San Jose, and now he's been to Chicago because he really likes this company that runs all these hackathons. So getting into it, they just have ID, name, email, and address. And so we're just going to kind of create a router in Next.js to behave on a form to be able to capture new attendees versus existing attendees and kind of do a progressive profiling of form capturing to see this progression and improvement of being able to only ask for what we need and not have people have to fill out their name, email, and yada, yada, yada every single time they attend all these events. Because John Doe just wants to do it that way. He wants to sign up when he gets there. But the way he has to do it is he now only has to be asked the things that he wants to provide that he hasn't provided previous, which in this case, at the Chicago one, it's going to be first time at event. And it's going to be a Boolean. It's going to say yes or no. Not my first time at the event. And maybe we need to give context. But for this one, he'll probably say yes because it's his first time at the Chicago one. Maybe we could rename this label to be first time at our events. But we can do that when we get there. So without further ado, write in the comments if that made any sense. This one takes a little bit more context, but that was kind of the challenge, was to create a progression of dynamic forms using the app materializer so that we only have to ask for the information that we need for each individual attending an event. And also, I don't think you can hear it, but it is raining very loudly here. So apologies if you can. It is like storming behind me and I'm trying not to pay attention to it. So let's dive right into it. So, oh yeah, and this was kind of what we posted at the Discord was if you want to continue on and be able to be a part of this as well, we just kind of are saying to everyone, it's called the Stump-a-Stepr challenge. So just send us anything you want. This is what we're doing today. We're doing one of the first challenges. This is the first very one of the Stump-a-Stepr challenge. And we're going to be showing how we can link APIs together and link different data sources in a very challenging way that someone wants to be able to see. And that's what we did today. I worked on this one with the challenger, and it was a really good time. We had an awesome blast seeing what we can do and being able to kind of create dynamic form entries. And there's more to come with this one. And I hope it's going to be just as cool as this one that we're about to jump into. So feel free to send them over to us. You can DM me on Discord, sign up for us. There's a Discord on StepSend that you can sign up, send it that way, or you can tweet it at me, whatever you want. And I'll put my Twitter up at the end of this video so that you can check it out, or we can just put it in the description or something like that. So I think if I swipe over, there's my code. So I just kind of already had a lot going on here. I just wanted to jump right into it and not do any installations and just kind of show that this is just a standard Next.js file. And this is, we have next configs and everything like that in here. And all I did was in this next config.js, I put in all of my keys that I want to be able to use for Firebase. And then if you were to bounce over to our components that we kind of have in here, I'm calling all of those keys from our config into our API keys. And as you can see, I have these as public right now. You don't want to do that if you ever want to go into a production build. You'll expose those keys. Next has ways of securing these. And I'll kind of show how we'll be doing that with StepSend's endpoint and securely processing those for a build so that when you actually run that, it's actually just pinging an API page and it's not exposing any keys that you may not want to when you actually have a build running. So I'm going to kind of go back over and get out of components, and we're going to dive right into it. So I think I already did the installation. So if we run npm run dev, and I have my env in here, and all you can see in there is that I have an env variable with my StepSend API key and my URL endpoint that we are going to be building in the StepSend folder. So I will kind of show, maybe I have that in here, and I'll kind of show where we have that going on in our components. And you can see that we'll be calling and discussing that at some point. But that's what I have in my env folder as well. So that's just things I won't be showing right at the beginning. So I just want to get those out of the way and just let you know that's the environment variables that you have to expect coming into here. And if you run into issues, don't spend hours. These are security things that you have to be aware of to get everything running. So just make sure you have those. These are coming from my environment folder that I have down here. And then my other ones that I showed you, Firebase, next config. So just remember that going into it. So we have it running, compiled successfully. And I have another one pulled up over here, and that's just my actual StepSend one that I pulled up. So that's just CDing into what I like to call my GraphQL backend that will be running from our StepSend endpoint. And it's going to be really cool. We're going to be showing how this ties in with our local host that'll actually be holding our REST endpoints as well. So we're supporting REST and GraphQL in this source. So we'll dive into it. And then if we come over, localhost should then pop up the same thing we had over here. And as you can see, it pulls up the index page, and I'll give you a little preview of the index page as we get into that. But if we were to click on the check-in experience here, which is a routing, and I just have the Firebase logo here. So this is a Firebase, REST, Next, GraphQL combo that we're going to be doing all in one right here. And we're using the Firebase Sdk. So we'll pop back over. And as you can see in my package.json, I'll give you a little preview of this. We have dependencies, material UI, just for cleanliness, Axios, and then we have QR code is something that actually was just part of the overall larger package. I still have some of the dependencies in here, so a lot of them don't pay attention. These are just a part of the larger project that we were working on initially. I just haven't removed them, but really you just want to focus on Axios, and then I think we have in here the Firebase SDK. So Firebase is coming in, and you're going to want to download those and make sure that you have the Firebase installed so that you're able to properly run the what they call collections and how we're going to be able to retrieve those from our Firebase store. So popping back over, we want to be able to start creating our first page. So the way this is going to kind of be is they're going to check in, they're going to give us their email, and then based on the email that they provide, we're going to be able to see if they exist in our Firebase store and then be able to redirect them as either a new user that's signing up or an existing user with only the fields that we need, as mentioned previous. So I'm going to just copy that over from what I built out, and I'll just paste it in here. Oh, maybe I have to actually, let's go check in. And pages in NextJS, as you need to remember, is actually the way you write the file is how it's going to be displayed in the path. So you want to write it exactly as you want to see in the path in your URI path. So this one I want to see with a dash in between it. And as you can see in the index.js, we're calling that dash folder. And it's as if you're literally calling it from a reference right up here. You have to call it the same exact way in there for it to work. So getting into here, I kind of just copied and pasted this one, which you're like, why the heck aren't we live coding this? Well, it's a bigger project. So getting into Box React, you can see that pretty much all the dependencies we have in here is standard on Material UI and React. And I'm doing this just for cleanliness of the code and kind of organizing everything. But then there's two other dependencies in here called get event and person search. So that's why there's not a lot going on here. This person search one is a larger file in our components that we're going to be diving deeper into. And then all it's taking is event name. And I'm kind of showing how you can do server-side props with Next.js alongside of the client that will be behaving with a router that we'll be doing shortly when we actually have the email being checked in. So if you want to click on that, you can see a lot more about that. But I will first dive into the site and make sure we can have that loading properly. So if we go to check-in, hopefully everything works. Click. There we are. Okay. So welcome to the Windy City Hackathon. So we pulled that in. I'll show you how we pulled it in from server-side props shortly. This is the people search page that we're going to be doing. So when we enter in our information, we're going to be able to go to the page, which right now we get an error. That's awesome because we don't have the page coming in. So there's no problem. I think if I refresh it, everything still works as expected. This is just a home button, and we'll kind of dive into person search next. And as you can see here, we have a lot of dependencies, but a lot of it being Material UI, so don't focus too much on it. And then we are not even using these. I should have just erased them from the beginning. But you have use router, and we're going to be using the router to be able to do all this routing that we want to be able to send data between these two pages, right? So the biggest thing we're going to be focusing on is we're going to route either to new user or existing user. And the way we're going to have to do that is we're going to have to somehow pass that state. And this is probably the hardest part of this project that I had to wrap my head around was from the challenger of being able to pass state in Next. We have a state folder here as a dependency. It's very, very, very complex. It's not easy to understand by any means. And what we do is we have app context and we use dispatch context, and it kind of comes up here. And we are essentially doing a reducer. This is very React focused on how it kind of behaves right here, and it's client side, how it does it by passing state. So if we come up to the top here, you have your initial states behaving with your app context and your dispatch context. So these are all the states that are being passed throughout the application. And the biggest reason why we want to be able to do this is the moment we have the email search and we go and search for that person over in our Firestore, when we do that, we want to be able to then move the data of that person so that we can compare it to the fields of the Windy City Hackathon to all the fields that they've done previous from the previous hackathon. So every single field that John Doe has filled out at a previous hackathon, we don't want him to fill out again. So we have to pass all the fields that he has to the next pages. And I'll show how we tie all that together on the StepSend side, because we'll be doing that through GraphQL and actually showing how that data of events and all the fields of each event is being tied into an individual person based on the event IDs that are associated with them. So getting into state, I'm not going to dive too deep into this. I'll just kind of show you. We have a reducer, and what happens is when you have a case of process, which is what we have going on down here, we have type process. So we're just identifying the type of dispatch that we're doing, and we're just dispatching a state. We're passing person that's coming in to this on button click that we have of, I might be getting into this too fast, honestly, but on this on button click of check-in, it passes a person to the state, and then it comes over here and moves throughout this app. And then I will actually get into this more later on, because I realize that's going to be a little over the head on being able to understand how this kind of all ties in. And we'll do it when we actually move the event and go step by step on this. We'll focus more on data for now. I'm realizing we're a little far on that one. But that's essentially what's happening here. And I'll save this because we weren't using those dependencies. Actually, I'll keep them in there just in case if I want to refer back to them. We'll keep those just in case if I want to actually pull in types. So this is all TypeScript. It's TypeScript focused for the most part. We have some JS files. TypeScript's awesome. It allows you to make sure you're only getting type values that you really, really want in JavaScript, which enhances your JavaScript skills and helps you understand how to make sure when you build in an actual production environment, it doesn't break on you. It gets past the compiler that you want to be able to do. So we'll get back into check-in. And this is the page that we saw previous. And we have a get event here. And at our get event, we're going to be getting a query from GraphQL. And all we're going to be doing is searching for a Firebase by event that has an ID associated with the hackathon in our Firestore. So this is a good transition, and it's coming from StepSend to our StepSend folder and our APIs. And then we can talk about the front end a little bit more and what we're going to be doing. Because I think now we have a good enough understanding of what's going to be going on the front end. So hopping over, let's go over to our first step of understanding our APIs. So this is the REST part, and this was a part of the build of the initial user. It was the ability to have event list, events in person. So what this means is we have a local host, and when we're running the pages, now we're going to be able to actually have localhost 3000 API events, person, event list, be able to get all the data of an individual coming from the Firebase store. So if you go into here a little bit, you're going to be able to see in the TypeScript file that it behaves very similarly to get, patch, and then if you come over here to a read event, so this is getting an individual event ID. So I think if we were to come over and it was to do events on this one and kind of show you what's going on here, you can see that we're just awaiting for read events. If you pop back over and actually go into Postman, I have it running here, and I used ngrok, and ngrok essentially behaves as just a little layer of storage on your local host. But if you were to run HTTP localhost here, it would be the same exact thing. It's just a different way of running your local host with a more independent server. So getting into events here, send it. Chicago ID right here, first time at event, name, string, address, email, Windy City Hackathon. You can see here we have all the individual form fields going on along with Silicon Valley Hackathon, Miami one, all the things that we saw in the Firestore initially. So same thing if you were to pop on over, we have all these different endpoints as you saw. We had event list and we had person. So if we search for John Doe as we expected, I already had this all pulled up initially. We're pinging our local host. This is just a layer on top of it called GraphQL backend that I have. And that doesn't make much sense. I should have called this one REST backend. I'm sorry about that. But the reason I named it that is because we'll also be calling a GraphQL backend that does behave and do the same exact thing of being able to call your API __ GraphQL. And the structure of these files is all as we see it. So Next has a good way of laying this out to where we have our GraphQL.txx file here, right alongside of all the other endpoints we had at API. And we're doing all the same queries that we expect with the same exact steps in URL, key, headers that need to be provided coming from up here. So now everything that needs to be done through GraphQL can be done through this folder, and then through all your different events that need to be done on a REST, you have to separate those into more folders because everything's at a different endpoint, right? But this is how it was initially, and we just wanted to be able to combine the two and show that we can support both. Popping in, you can see read events, and then this is the Firestore SDK and how you would be able to utilize that. So DB collection, and then we have event that we saw initially over the Firebase Store. Let's go get them. And then for all the events, let's map them out and let's tie those to an event TypeScript an interface coming from TypeScript. And it's going to be an array that we want to expect coming in. And then let's return all those events of that array. And that's what you would expect to see from a standard REST DB call coming in and being able to utilize. And we have that in our lib here, which is our library of just kind of like all the DB utilizations and tying in from our database, which is calling our Firebase right here, as you can see. So our app length, and then being able to tie to our Firebase store, we just kind of pull all those in instead of having to write this out every single time for each one. You're able to pop in to your DB utilize right here, and then it's calling those every single time when it wants a collection. So that's about it when it comes to understanding how to actually have these REST API calls, properly handling each call that's coming to it. So if you were to go in, you can see that we had get and push and everything like that. We're going to be focusing entirely on queries today and pulling data together. And then if you notice in here how these behave with one another and how we can see over here in our GraphQL backend right here and how event list is pulled in, we're actually handling multiple different multiple different IDs that are coming in as query parameters. And we have person, and we're going to be tying these two together in our steps in API. So popping over, we're going to be using those. And that's why I gave a lot of context to the REST, because we're going to be doing REST in our GraphQL. So moving into steps in. Yeah, it's gotten super dark. I hope you guys can see me okay. Yeah. See, I don't know when you sent that, but reducers is something I needed to give context to early. But to give full context as to what's going on, I think is a conversation that we can have for hours later after that. So I'll try to be as brief as I can without keeping people too confused. So coming into the Firebase, sorry that I'm not writing this out, step by step, but this is just for time. I want to be able to show the full process of this app within a reasonable time frame. So you kind of get into what's going on here. You can see all the same exact endpoints that we have that we were labeling earlier. And we're not going to be using all these, but I just kind of wanted to show in a clean process. You can get all Firebase events, all tie into Firebase event, as you see here. And that's just a type that we have going on. A little bit farther up, that's the form field, ID, location, name. So the same exact thing we saw in the Firebase store, we're going to be processing that in the same exact way because it's handled the same way in our REST API that we built out in our pages folder a little bit earlier. So Firebase person, as you can see, we have all the individual fields here. And then this is where the magic kind of happens on being able to tie all of our data together. So as we saw earlier, we had event IDs stored with each individual Firebase person. But if we wanted to be able to understand the actual fields that someone's had to fill out previous from each event, maybe we want to know how many times someone has had to fill out a field previous to us actually implementing this process. Maybe we want to understand the actual names and be able to display the names to someone on a page and say, hey, that's awesome that you've attended these X amount of events before, and here's where you've been location-wise. All the fields that you normally get from a Firebase event, you couldn't get without being able to use this little sequence we have right here. Or not sequence, I'm saying that out of just flowed with the conversation there, but it really is you're getting an at materializer, and we have an at sequence directive, which is why I was saying that. But we're going to be doing events, and we're going to be tying in that same query that we had down here, event list by ID. And as you can see, this is where it's really, really cool and really interesting on how we handle this. So we have in context the same exact endpoint that we had here of API list ID, right? Of right here where we had every single ID popping over to each one. What we do here is StepSend handles it by going onto a explode. And that's a conversation and a keyword we've been talking about a lot, is it explodes this nested array and this nested string of those event IDs associated with a person, and allows us to then explode them and throw them all in as UTM parameters at the end of this event list, so that when we want to be able to see the data of John Doe right here, and we want to be able to tie for each event ID, we want to be able to see the names of these events, but we can't see them here because that's just the limitation of our database right now. We can do that by popping over and then putting in those IDs associated right here. And that's exactly what it's doing. And I think if I were to click send here, it should send it. I think I just actually had NPM running down. If I were to turn off my next environment right now, this would not run. And that would prove that it is localhost. I don't have this at some magical endpoint right now. It's actually running in those endpoints. But it shows right here, he's been to 2 events previous, and now we actually get to understand the name, location, and all the form fields that have been associated other than just ID. So right away, whatever else data we wanted to be able to provide from an event, we can now do that and tie that in just because we know the ID of the events they've attended. So we're going to be using the form fields and actually manipulating how we want to query the next page by the form fields that are coming in here. And that is it for Postman. So if we bounce back over, now we can see that, we have an array of strings passing in as an argument to our event list by ID. So it needs to have the same thing here, and it needs to match. So if we were to run stepsend start, and let's say we didn't have an array of strings and we just pulled in one, we ran it. I think it'll eventually start. There we go. Argument ID for query field event list cannot be set for a field required type string, but has string. So it still ran. Definitely didn't want to be able to pull that up, and it'll still pull this up. We'll still be able to go John Doe example. But if we go address, email, ID, I think it'll still run. May still support it, maybe not. Oh, yep, still does. But then if you were to start getting into events and you want to be able to pull these in, you'll get in there. Oh, maybe not. What did I do? So it's because I have it running somewhere else. Oh, no. No, it pulls in both of them. I don't know. Let's see. Maybe if I just close this down, I just actually plant these in. Maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe I have this open up somewhere else. There. Let's try it again. Example.com. Same ones. So it located the error, but it still ran. Maybe it was just cached. But at the end, regardless, we now know that it's actually running successfully. It's going to return no error on this one. We know that strings are tied individually as they're supposed to. And a guarantee to the fact that if you were to bring in more IDs and be able to associate more, or if you wanted to send an individual ID, we have that supported for that endpoint as well. To be able to bring one to as many other IDs that you want to be able to associate with an individual person, you'll get the response that you need from this endpoint. So popping back over, we are back to the check-in page. So I guess we'll head on over there now that we understand how the data is going to be coming in. So we come into there and we have the lib. We'll pop over into our person search as it is a subdirectory to, or a subcomponent to the check-in page. We're going to kind of show what's going on here. So we're back to the router, and this is the biggest part of the page that we'll have to understand. Everything else kind of comes pretty easy, and it's just a lot of checks and balances. This is really what's going to be going on is we're pulling in the router. We're going to have the person, name, email, ID. We just use a state there as a standard. We're going to probably get that with each individual person. We have dispatch, which is kind of what we talked about earlier on being able to use the reducer and being able to actually pass the state from page to page as we do routing, because we're actually passing it as a global standard in pages. Right here. So as you can see in our state provider, we have app context in there. And then the state provider is what's actually handling and passing it through every single page. So it's really wrapping the application, and you're going to be seeing that updated state on each individual page as you continue to route throughout the application. So that's kind of how the dispatch is going to be working hand in hand with that app context and being able to dispatch that information from page, update states, whatever you may need to do essentially is those initial states of this page, check-in page, is going to be passing as a global person to each page as we continue on through the process. So getting into, and I'm going to skip these for now because we're going to go into the return. You can see that welcome to the, and then the event's name. And then as you can see, if we scroll down, we are querying, oh, I actually have it, hold on, props event name. So it's the props. So it's that get event coming from the check-in page that we had on the other side. And I'll just pull that up kind of over here so we can see that for context. Get event, we're just kind of passing that in as a prop right here to our person search as event name. So when we come back over to it, it makes a lot of sense that that's what we're going to see in here. So props coming in, just a real simple way of showing that we can pass those through. And that's server-side generation. So that is SEO friendly. That's a really good way. It kind of behaves like PHP, WordPress. I like to use that as an example of being able to show how we can process that information before the page, while the page is rendering, rather than having on the client side. And usually that's like a hindrance to where if you want to be able to actually have SEO generation, you want to limit the amount of clients that you have making calls in between. And for security reasons, it's happening on the back end and it's happening in our library, as you can see in the back here, so that everything's secure and it's not going to be able to get caught in any requests or responses from our application. It's all going to be handled very securely, and you're not going to have to pass any credentials or things like that. It's all handled within the application at build time. So as you can see here, we have that input. So we're looking for the email, and on change, we're going to update the field, right? So going into the updated field, we're going to set the person to the target name and target value of that input. It's a very standard way of handling input values, and we're just going to tie that to the set person. And then when we do that, we're going to process the call. And you're going to query that person based on the person email. And then we're going to check if that person exists. And we're going to find that person. And I'll take us to that page. And that's our Axios call. So Axios is posting to this find person page. And I actually need to update this. I think I updated that to GraphQL just so we had an easier standardization of GraphQL calls. So it's essentially this page. I changed it from find person to GraphQL just so it makes a little bit more sense. Our GraphQL page, so API GraphQL. So we're making that call here, adding the key, making sure we understand the URL that's being passed. We won't be making that right now. I don't really want to log it. But then we have headers coming in, and then we're just responding if it was successful, and we give the data that we need as a response. So that's what we're picking up here when we come in to the person search. And then we're going to be able to get it. And there's a lot of data that goes into it, but it's kind of the way GraphQL is just handled. There's practices that you can do to kind of move that for now, but right now we just have it to where I reassign it to a person, and then we're able to console log that person and make sure that they're coming in. Assign it obviously here to make sure person is being logged, and I will do that. Person being carried. So now we have that carrying, and then dispatch. So this is where we're going to be actually having that reducer send the data to the next page and be able to pass this person there and say, hey, this is the data that we got from when we made this call. These are the fields that they have associated with their event. Then we have, if the event came back null, we're going to associate them with the new visitor with the router, and we're going to take them to that field. And then else, we're going to take them to a custom form. And I think with that, that kind of shows that we don't have these pages here, as you may have noticed. not in our components, but in our pages, you'll notice we don't really have these here. We only have check-in page, so we're going to create these pages now. So we go in and we create new visitor, TSX. I'm going to do a little CMP just so I can talk about it more rather than having to just debug my way through it. I don't know what I just did. Cancel. We'll CMP. Now I'm doing the same exact thing that I did with the check-in page. And the reason I'm doing that is because if you go to our get event, what's going on here, as you can see, we're calling that Chicago event that we can see on the field, right? So Windy City Hackathon has a certain amount of fields associated. So if it's a new user, well, we know that we're not going to reduce anything. We're not going to reduce the amount of fields that are going to be going on. And I say reduce literally because that's what the reducer is doing, is passing it to the next page so we can reduce the amount of fields that we need to provide. We're going to be able to just provide every single field that comes from the Windy City Hackathon. So all we do is we can serve that through a server-side generation, because we know that's what's going to be loaded on the page. We already know what's going to happen. We don't have to do any deducing to figure out what we need to present to this individual user. So we can just ask it for this one. And you can also pass in IDs as unique IDs like this. I didn't do it for this one just to keep it easy and keep the code clean so you can understand this, but you can essentially pass in an ID like here and pass in props for it, depending on the type of event that's going on, how you want to handle to determine the event. Maybe you want to make it a global parameter. Who knows? It depends on how you actually want to handle the event going on for that day. We'll worry about that when we get there, right? So popping up, we'll be able to see that if we save it, and I'll kind of just see if we can run the function right now. Save that. We have it up and running. I'll put in dummy data. And so what's going to be happening is we're going to be checking, and we shouldn't see anything when we do this. It should come back null for the events associated with an individual. So if that's the case, then we should be redirected to our new visitor page. And there we are, redirected, new visitor page, and we have a form. There's no submit on it, and it's probably not the cleanest form that you've ever seen in your entire life, but nonetheless, it is a form, and I'm proud we got here. And I'm going to pop up real quick and just see if anyone has any questions as to how we got to this point. If not, we'll keep hammering. Cool. Yeah. We'll keep hammering. And then first time at event. So kind of what we're going to be expecting here is, just the standard Boolean that we saw coming from name, yada, 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 expecting address, email, and then being able to submit that. And we're not going to do a submit functionality and send it back or do any posts today. But these are the same exact fields that we saw coming from this unique API that we have here. So if we were to come over to our Postman just to keep sanity in place, we can check this out. We hit send. It should have ran to this endpoint right here, and we should get the data that we were expecting. What did I do, huh? Let's see. So, oh, no, type is supposed to be identified. Let's see, do I have the right amount of fields coming on? API, GraphQL. I don't know. Maybe I'm not doing anything. I guess I could focus on debugging that or not, but that's what we should be expecting. So what you can have over here, you can test that it's coming from the StepSend endpoint as well. And it is here. So I guess I'll have to just figure out maybe what I am not sending there correctly. We can get into that. Maybe it's because we have declaratives in our person search right here, and it's expecting a certain amount of data coming to this API GraphQL. So maybe when we write a post, it's writing the same one every time. I'll have to look into that. But we know that the person's working. I think if we were to send that, I think that's up and live. No? Do I have it down? Well, it's working. It's still... I don't know what's going on. Maybe if I rename it to GraphQL, maybe I just have it named wrong. No, I just have it named wrong. I don't know. Maybe I had an underscore at one point. It was working, but there we go. So I just named this wrong. And at some point I must have had an underscore, which is kind of a GraphQL thing. It's, it's a part of the conversation GraphQL has. Is they sometimes have that underscore to make it unique. Sometimes they don't. I don't know, but that proves that you can pass really anything in there. As you can see, we're passing those unique IDs. I kind of have those being passed in. And I believe I have those, if we were to type in single string, I kind of just name this parameter a single string. You can name it something probably a little bit more that makes sense. Probably just final string, because it's not technically a single string. What I did was discovering the type that's coming in, and you can see it's a type object because it's having multiple, it's an array of strings, so it's an object. And if the type is a string, then we're just going to add arrays around it so that we can still support it. And then else, we're just going to have it equal directly as it, which we have been doing in this case. And then we can await and search by IDs, which is into this DB utilities that we discussed earlier. That kind of just passes the same ID here. And I'll just close these out so we don't have to worry about seeing those anymore. But where IDs are in this array of strings. So it's exactly as you saw, and it's very similar to GraphQL types. It behaves the same way in TypeScript, and that's why it's awesome, because you know when it builds, it's not going to break. It's definitely going to work for you. And when you write your endpoints in REST as well, you can do the same thing. You can write them in type, and that's what we did here. So you know that those are eventually going to be going through the type compiler and ensuring that you're getting exactly what you expect. So I'll just kind of close those down. And that's where you know that when it's pinging those individual points and it's coming from StepSend, StepSend's calling those REST points and then being able to explode those values and pass them into here to this REST point. That is, if I were to pop over, this point. So that's what's going on there. We're passing those right here, which are then being passed into this little if-else statement right before you be able to actually call your Firebase store. So getting back over, where were we? We were at the new visitor page. So now we can kind of just talk through the new visitor and see that if we're on here, handle form changed, we're just eventually going to be getting into set form state. So this is where you can start to actually be able to record that data and send it back. But we just put that in there as a sample of what you could do. But if you were to get into here, you can see a very long way of checking for types. And let's see if I can open that up this way. If not, I'll just go into components. So if you go into here, you can pretty much see that the form fields that we're going to be passing to it that are coming directly from the server-side generation that we had of the Chicago event. You can see that we're just doing a switch and we're casing on whether we want to have a string, number, Boolean, or any other type that may be coming in associated with a form type. It just creates different form values. So that's how we knew that when we had the Boolean, it created the yes, no radio button and form control of yes. And then if you come up here, you have the input value as well. Sorry, my computer's like lagging right now. Got a lot going on, but you have the string and then you have the text field coming in as well. So this is all type based and it's a really easy way. Oh my God. Sorry. Guess that's what happened. I think my computers. I think we're back in business. Let me know if am I good? Totally had a technical mishap right there. Felt like I was doing pretty good too. So I guess that's what was going on. It just like kind of went out on me real quick. I'm running on multiple monitors, so it works hard. But here we are. So getting back into the check-in, and now that we have the new visitor page up and running, and we know that it's getting the proper amount of fields we have, now let's actually make that little check page and be able to say, hey, no, we have different people coming in on this page. And we'll console log here a little bit more and be able to show how the data is actually passing. And then we'll be about done. So if we come into pages, and we create custom form, TSX, page. Awesome. Okay. Custom form. So as we know, we're going to be going to the check-in page. And we're going to have the person search. And then we're going to have that router be able to go to the correct page. I'll just pop that back open. And we're going to be able to pop over to custom form. If John Doe, essentially our person, decides that he wants to come to this next event, we'll be able to write that else statement and be able to redirect to a custom form. And I'll pop into here, and right away, I will log the data coming in so that we can see his details that are coming in and be able to match them. And as you can see, I have a lot of for loops written here, but it is a way of doing it. And it's actually a pretty fast way of doing it. If you need to do JavaScript ES6, this can be a good way of doing it. And we're just going to compare the fields alongside of each other and see if we can get a different value and ask him for exactly what we need based on the values we haven't gotten from him yet. So nothing really changing here, just a new form coming in, and we have the fields passing in. So it's going to be the same exact kind of style. I'm going to scroll real quick. Sorry about it. Server-side props, get event, same exact thing we were doing on all the pages. We're getting the fields for the Windy City Hackathon, understanding that we need these specific values for this event for someone to successfully check in. And then after we get those fields, we're going to come up and we're going to see that we have the contexto, context, and we're going to use the app context person details and be able to pass those in from app context, which is that reducer that is asking for the global states that are going to be passed around and used in this process. And I hope I have been keeping this big enough for you guys. I'll zoom in at this point. Now that we've kind of given more detail, I hope you guys have been able to see enough. But I will move this over a little bit. Oh, I guess it's already kind of big. So let's pop it open. And then we can see that's still running. So I'm just going to save it. Now that we have the fields and person details coming in, we're going to be able to see that. And this isn't the most secure way of doing it, right? This is just a way of doing it to make sure that it can be done. But if you want to be able to do it without passing person details, you may want to create a separate way of handling an individual's fields that they've already filled out without actually giving any of their client information and passing that along and through. But for this case, we wanted to keep the data pretty simple. So we'll be passing the data associated with the emails and address and name of this John Doe. But in reality, you're going to want to keep it a little more secure going forward. And then all we're going to do is we're going to compare the two in this long for loop and then be able to spit out the final fields that we need and just compare and contrast based on what we want to be able to actually ask for. And then the final fields will be passed into final fields here. And if there is nothing that we need to do, then we can say, you're done. Here's your QR code to be able to attend the event, which is actually a process that we may be able to show at a later point. So diving into here, we're going to go back. And at the check-in right here, we're doing server side. We're calling a Stepson endpoint, and we're calling for those events, and we're in those fields and being able to see if we can eventually get those at this page that we're going to be getting on the next step. But right here, we're going to be doing that check that we saw. So John Doe in-person search is using that Axios call, and then we're going to query for that person and search for that email. And I'll console log here so we can kind of see that passing in. Person. Okay. And it'll only bring, because this is a state, remember? So as we should expect, we're setting person. We're only expecting name, email, ID. Now, that's a good way of actually protecting data is if you don't want to pass everything and you just want the form fields, maybe you want empty parameters or something like that. And once you capture it, you can just kind of send it as that. It's a good way of limiting, making sure you don't ask for more than what you need. Don't bite more. That's kind of a great thing about GraphQL too, right? Is we only ask for what we need. I'm asking for a bit more here just so we can get a bit more context and understand what we're actually trying to get from events and show what we can have coming in for an individual person. So I'll save that. It might refresh. Let's see. We'll check the person. I'll open up my console. We'll be able to see some data come in. No errors right now. And this does build too. I just tested on build. So we can see person came in, email. So we're going to associate it. John Doe. Awesome. Look at that. Went to custom form because we recognize that this person did have events associated. So email came in. And then we can see that it queried, and I can console log that query for you too. But really what we were able to see was events was not empty. So now we can see that we had 2 events associated with that individual. And we're actually able to, this is from that StepSend app materializer. And if we pop back over and look at that materializer, what happened there was it checked with that query and then was able to pull in through the app materializer. Not too far. Form fields. So we knew that we were able to grab those form fields. And then when we came into person search, we can see form fields were pulled in right here, type, label, and field that we needed to see. We pulled in this type right here with that individual person, and all we needed to ask for was that person's email. And we were able to pull in all the event details of which they've attended from a previous event using the app materializer. So that's the magic of being able to tie the data together and showing, hey, John, you've been to 2 hackathons. We're able to tell that now. And you could have done that by just grabbing the 2 IDs of the events and counting those. But say we wanted to be able to say, you've been to 2 hackathons, comma, and then you've been to the San Jose and Miami one, we can do that. We can just write a little bit more code and be able to list those out and say, you've been to 2 hackathons, these hackathons, or we can make a cool little map for them and say, look how far you traveled. You traveled X amount of distance based on the locations you've been to. And then, a way you can do this, and I wrote it here, a few more and you'll get a prize. This is a good way of saying, if you want to do a little prize on saying the amount of someone travels with your company, with this hackathon team, the hackathon team says, if someone travels with us X amount of distance, let's give them a t-shirt, let's give them some merchandise. Well, you can do that now because you get the location, San Jose, and you get the location, Miami. So if we were to give real addresses there, other than just dummy data, you'd be able to say, okay, this person's traveled X amount, travel this much more, and you'll be able to get a t-shirt from our hackathon, which is a really cool way of being able to show how you can do this data and pass it in a really unique way. But what we actually did here was we passed in the form fields. So as you can see here, we passed in name from the San Jose one, and then we passed in address, name, email, and phone. So as you remember, when we went to the new visitor form, we asked for every single event field that we wanted with the Chicago event, which I believe was address, name, email, and first time at event. So right now what we're being able to do is, and I console log that so I can just tell you exactly what it was. Fields, you can see here, this is coming from the get server props, and that get event that we had on the Chicago one, you can see first time, name, address, email. These are the form fields coming from the Chicago event. As you can see here, the Windy City Hackathon. So what we did was, and you can dive into that for loop all you want. I won't be doing it. We tied and showed and wanted to be able to compare and contrast all these form fields. And I essentially just was coming in and if the field equals the other fields from the person that carried it in, remove that field. We don't need to even have that there. We don't need to include that. And all we need to ask for this person when they come to this new event is this your first time at the event? You can say yes. And then John may think we're talking about something else. And at that point, that's called the UI UX project on being able to see what's the best thing on someone understanding how to actually fill out a form. But he's able to get the field that he only has not associated. And the moment he clicks yes and clicks submit, send that off and he can create a new field on that Firestore that then if you were to go to the next event, they ask the same question with the same field name first time, he won't be asked again. But you can create obviously exclusions if you want to ask that every single time. Write that in, say don't associate first times. We want first times to be in there every single time. You can write exclusions like that. That's always allowed. But that's really the magic of this is you just created a application in NextJS of being able to pass state of person to another state of fields that's coming in from server side. So server side here, and then the actual person coming from right here, the email address state. Comparing the two, being able to see from the query that we ran, tying all the fields, and then being able to identify, okay, well, person that we just passed coming from the Axios call that we made to the StepSend endpoint, all the fields that we want to be able to tie in and see which one we have in the previous state and which ones we don't have now, and be able to identify which ones we need to ask at this new event. And that's kind of the magic right there, is you were able to ask the form fields, and we can kind of show that right here as we have that process call. The moment they click that individual button and said, here's my email, we were able to be like, okay, this person's checking us out. They're at this next event at the Chicago Hackathon. Let's go ping that API GraphQL endpoint with that body of this query right up here, query person that we identified. And then if you come back down, you can see that we'll get a response saying, yeah, this person does exist, custom form, or this person does not exist. And we need to just ask them for all the same fields that you would for the Windy City when they're a new user. And then we use the dispatch, which is the magic of the reducer, and moving to the next field of custom form and being able to pass that state through the reducer of the app context, and then console logging that and being able to assign it to person details, and then being able to have fields associated alongside of person details side by side, which is fields, the Windy City fields, and the details of the individual of the events they've attended previous. And then I kind of ran this for loop just to kind of show the magic of how you can actually tie that data all together and actually have it go on runtime, be able to see the unique field that only needs to be filled out. And then we kind of just, based on all those that came in, we ran one more on being able to set the fields, and we filtered them. And if the new fields do not include the value of the existing field, set it to fields. And then all we did was, if set field is more than this, push it into the final fields. And then we assign the final fields all the way down here to the new form. And then that new form takes in those fields, as you saw earlier, the type, the field, the label, and is able to put those out on the form. One more time. Boom, first time at event. And that's what's happening. It's all from a StepSend call at that moment of junction, and being able to pass that between, and using that at materializer of passing data between these amazing REST APIs that are all being handled here. And if you were to just pop into here in this API folder, this is where all the magic's happening. They're side by side. This GraphQL one right here is calling all of these right here. And there's just a layer being able to tie it together with the app materializer, making those same calls to our local host, our GraphQL backend that I have here, and I just ngrok them by being able to use the explosion feature and being able to pass the array of strings from that person from the event IDs. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to close these down. And if you were to run these on build, I can just show that it will work. And even if we were to call these right now, these aren't running, right? So if we were to try to ping this, it won't hit it to prove that that is my local host running. So we expect that to be going on there. And this does build even with the TSX. So it gets past the build time, and it's not production ready by any means based on security, but type wise, it did pass all the type restrictions that it needs, because you're pulling in mostly from an API that you expect in your pages folder that you're able to type out yourself with events, event lists, events in person, right alongside of your GraphQL that is also type-based. So it's very secure, very, very, very structured, and nothing really is going to get past this compiler as long as you're not just cheating the system and putting a bunch of any's in there. So that is all, and that is the app. You've been to 2 hackathons, and then if we were to try to put in anyone else, well, it's down, but if you were to try to put in anyone else, wouldn't work. Once again, as I said, if you really want to be able to see a challenge be able to be performed, we're sending out stickers to be able to do it. So if you want to stump us and try to send something like a bunch of REST calls and be able to see if we can tie together data in a certain way, feel free to send it to us. We're really excited to be able to see these come in and be able to handle all these different ways of processing data and showing how we can tie it together. And we just came out with this feature of being able to explode UTM parameters and explode a nested array, as we saw with those strings of an event ID. So that was an awesome one to be able to test, and we were able to show that we can actually use it and create progressive profiling which is a big thing that people are trying to do to make sure that they can understand the users of their application, but not fatigue them of constantly asking them questions, or in a lot of users always saying, and I'm sure people have said it all the time, you've already asked me this, don't ask me again. This is a perfect example of if you just are calling data from other sources within maybe the same application, like your Firestore, you can do that. And you know that you're going to be expecting the data every single time, and you don't need to ask the same thing twice because you know it's there. And then if you ever need to reference it, you can continue to use the same app materializer and the same connections and linking of data that you have, and just be like, oh, okay, this is what we're handling here, and this is all the information we have of this individual that's been to 3 of our hackathons. John Doe was very helpful today. And as you can see, that was all the data we've been pulling in throughout the day, just a bunch of dummy data. And you can do it yourself, and it's really cool. And I had a lot of fun doing it. So feel free to sign up, right? Like as always, come to StepSend, sign up. A lot of fun. You can build out this app materializer, be able to explode all the types of query parameters you want. That way you only have to pass in the IDs whenever you want to be able to update a person. And then whenever you want to be able to just see the individual, you can run that GraphQL query, and you can actually be able to see that and what's going on when you want to be able to tie in fields from each individual event to a user that's going on at a new event that they may have wanting to attend. And so Discord, as usual, you can sign up for it right down here. Send me stuff. Also, feel free to tweet at me. We made it over an hour, so I'm going to sign off. And feel free to ask any questions. If not, thanks for coming. And if you're watching this in the future, have fun hacking. See ya.